Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and with us continuing, I can't talk. I'm Ron Burgundy. With us continuing our Transformers coverage, right? We need to make a more solidified schedule, but with us covering more Transformers stuff while we're all kind of stuck in our homes. Initially, I thought about just kind of jumping in with like More Than Meets the Eye and Robots in Disguise, but I realized that like we never finished All Hail Megatron, so we're gonna kind of like run through All Hail Megatron and then kind of jump forward from there. So I don't really expect this to be like an overly popular series, but I do want to kind of get it covered and get it finished and sort of call it a day. So in the last, really the first video that we did 2 years ago, God, it's really been that long. In the first video that we did 2 years ago, we essentially had this scenario where like the Decepticons had shown up on Earth and basically conquered it, right? Like, and their conquering of Earth happened like that. I mean, like humanity had no real chance against the power of the Decepticons because one, they're just so technologically advanced, and two, in comparison to humanity's weaponry, they're just so weak. And so for the most part, the story had largely kind of followed the exploits of two characters. The first one was a guy named Bridge, and the second one was a guy named Andy. And Andy was really just like one of multiple people out there who had been sort of mobilized by the military in an effort to try to take out the Decepticons. And much like most other members of the military, he ended up failing. And in fact, a lot of other members ended up dying, but Andy was one of the survivors, right? And so following that, he ended up coming across Bridge, who of course also came across a woman named Sarah, and Bridge kind of stepped in to help save some people's lives. And so there really isn't any real connection to these guys outside of the fact that they all just kind of happened to meet each other in the midst of this veritable apocalypse, right? And so for the most part, humanity is really on its last stand. That's really all it is. Like there's really nothing they can do. And so what this does is it picks up with the Decepticons and basically Megatron kind of addressing all the Decepticons who were here and basically saying, we've successfully conquered Earth, right? Like the Earth is ours, nobody can stand in our way. Like humanity as a whole is completely and totally broken. Now, this also begs the question, where are the Autobots? Okay, so one of the things that's kind of hinted at here over the course of this story is that there's a traitor among the ranks of the Autobots. We don't know for sure, and we don't know who it is, but all we know is that at the moment, because of the actions of this traitor, that Optimus Prime is essentially out of commission, like literally on a table, just kind of in shambles and not really functioning. And the Autobots themselves were basically overcome and really kind of left as a sort of ragtag group by the Decepticons, which kind of left the path open by virtue of this traitor for the Decepticons to target and conquer Earth. That's kind of what's going on at the moment. The reality of this is that there is some stuff going on with the Autobots, but they're just not that interesting in comparison to what's going on with the Decepticons, right? Because if you guys are anything like me, bad guys are way more interesting than good guys, right? Like I love Decepticons. It's a cool thing. I always like the villains more than I like the heroes. Now, the funny thing about Bridge and really in the aftermath, what we saw in the last video, which is to say, with this kind of safe haven, you know, sort of being a location for like Bridge and for Sarah and for Andy and the various other people they managed to save or sort of rally to their cause, where they had some measure of a safe haven, the Decepticons came like rolling in and trashed the place. And so as a result of that, it kind of destroyed this feeling of like safety, right? It was kind of a chance for humanity to catch their breath, only for this ragtag band to suddenly have it yanked away. And Bridge is kind of watching all this go down and is just sort of like, whatever, man. And it's interesting because Sarah steps in and she's just like, get it together, man. Like whether you want to be or not, these people see you as a leader. And where he doesn't really want to be the guy who leads anyone, the result is that they see him that way anyway. And so because of that, it's essentially his job to keep things organized, either that or kind of let it all fall to chaos. And it's kind of a weird predicament to be in. You can kind of see Bridges' perspective where it's like, but they're grown functioning human beings that are capable of rational thought. If this is how they're acting in a state of panic, then all they're doing is just being themselves, right? It's only in a state of extreme duress and desperation that people show you who they really are. Everything up until that point is just a facade, right? That's kind of an attitude or a mindset that can be adopted here. But at the same time, it's also one of these things where it's like those who have the ability to do something have the responsibility to do something, right? So essentially it comes down to how much do you care about other people, right? And that's really what it is. And up to this point, Bridge doesn't really seem to care. He's just kind of like, it doesn't really matter to me what they do, right? Like they can do their own thing, they can get it together or they can not get it together. I don't care. Like as long as I survive and as long as you survive, we're going to be fine. At that moment, Sarah calls his manhood into question. It's like, what kind of man are you, right? Like, are you a man who stands for something or are you a coward who just cares about his own skin? Like, nut up, be a leader. That's just the way that it is. You may not like it, but that's the role that's been thrust on you. Suck it up and learn to deal with it. And Bridge really kind of takes this to heart and really kind of, ends up jumping in. So what we do here is we end up picking up with Colonel Witwicky and then like a young guy who's brought in. And of course, when this kid comes in, we basically end up finding out this is Witwicky's son, right? right? And so from there, you end up having this really sort of interesting conversation between the two, right? Where they kind of initially start to talk about things like, how's your mother doing, and so on and so forth. And so when you're talking about this guy Spike, with the relationship between his father isn't really given here outside of anything other than they embrace each other and they seem to have a good situation going on. The problem with this is that Spike's role really kind of seems to be like Black Ops or Subterfuge or something like that, where basically he sneaks into locations, engages in particular actions, and sneaks out, right? So we can largely assume that maybe he's something akin to like an Army Ranger or like a Navy SEAL or something like that. Whatever the case is, he kind of does some espionage stuff. And so as a result of this, he's really kind of been tasked, or really, unwillingly being tasked by his father to carry out a mission. And the reason why is because he basically shows him a picture of Megatron, and that while humanity is really on the ropes and humanity really has nothing to offer here in the way of being able to combat these various Decepticons, that they've seen enough being broadcast by virtue of the Decepticons trying to instill fear, terror, panic, different things like that. They've seen enough to realize that Megatron is the one that they basically answer to. And so with that being the case, the idea is we kind of have a plan on what can be done to basically take this guy out. And what they're talking about here, what they really kind of seem to be looking at, is the idea of using a nuclear warhead. And the reality is that Witwicky doesn't want to send his son out there, but at the end of the day, it's his job. It's what he specializes in. And so as a result of that, Witwicky kind of has to send his son out there and really kind of cross his fingers and hope for the best. Because I imagine from Witwicky's perspective, he's kind of hoping the mission goes off without a hitch, but he really hopes his son survives more than anything else. The problem with this is that, they're kind of monitoring these guys' vital signs to know whether or not, they're succeeding. And they basically send them across their way. They get halfway across and they're obliterated by a Decepticon. And it's just kind of like, wow, like just like that, the mission failed. That right there, that moment right there, I think really highlights how outmatched humanity is, how outmatched they are, that every step they take to try to find some way to win this battle or win this war with the Decepticons, they're immediately nipped in the bud, right? It's like, it's essentially like trench warfare, right? I don't know how many of you guys ever read anything about World War I, but like the idea was that during World War I, those individuals who stuck their head above the trenches, the average lifespan was like 8 seconds or something like that, right? Like you peek your head up and within like 8 to 10 seconds, you'd be dead. It was something along those lines. That's what this is. They take one step, one foot out the door, dead. Witwicky's father just kind of starts freaking out, right? Because it's just kind of like, dude, my son is absolutely dead. The funny thing about this is that what we end up learning is that that's not true. Spike is the only one of his men that seems to have made it out alive, right? And he's all the way on the other side. And from what we can tell, intending to go full bore with his mission. Now, the other part of this is Starscream. Starscream was one of these characters where he was always vying to replace Megatron. He was always looking to be the guy who is leading the Decepticons. And depending on whether you're a fan of him or not, there are those who make the argument that Starscream would actually be a better leader of the Decepticons than Megatron is. And then there are others who are just like, Starscream's a poor man's Megatron, right? A poor man's Galvatron. That's how people look at him, or how some people look at him. The reality is, I think Starscream is better, but the thing that makes his character so cool is he's not really about just like overtly challenging Megatron, right? That never really happens. That's not how that works. It's swindling other people to his cause, right? Bringing other people to his side. It's going to this guy and saying, hey man, like, how do you think he's leading things, right? Like, I mean, things could be a little bit better, couldn't they? And the other person's kind of like, yeah, I mean, things are a little rough. It's like, it's like, man, this never would have happened if I was the one leading the Decepticons. And it's just little things like that, right? Like planting seeds of doubt, plotting and scheming and things like that. That's what makes him so cool. And it's one of these things where he kind of calls Megatron into question, asking things like, what's the point of all this? And that's really kind of the question that was being asked over the course of all of this, right? What was the point of attacking Earth? And that's what Starscream's question is. Like, why did we conquer this place, right? What's the purpose? What does it matter, right? Like, conquering Earth doesn't give us some kind of technology that will allow us to like destroy all the Autobots. Like, it's not as though Earth was home to like some insanely high level technological stuff that could like allow us to point a gun at like all the Autobots and just wipe them out all at one time. Humanity has like nukes, but these are all primitive weapons, right? They've got satellites that beam television signals. How advanced could they possibly be, right? Like that's kind of Starscream's perspective here, but it's not really the idea of challenging and saying like, we need to do something better. It's designed to kind of undermine Megatron, to kind of remind him, hey man, just so you know, I think you're full of crap. I think you're a terrible leader. I don't think you have any real plan here. And that's what Starscream kind of points out. When do you think everybody's going to start turning on you, right? Because people are going to start asking questions like, why are we here? What's the point of this great big huge battle? What's the next step of this plan? And Megatron doesn't really have one. He just showed up on Earth to conquer it, and that's it, right? It was kind of his grand scheme. It's the thing he always wanted to do. And now that he's achieved it, the question is, what comes next? And not having an answer to that question, that's what ends up making things really kind of difficult for him. And so from there, what we end up doing is we end up picking up in Versailles, France, with what's what's left of the United Nations. And the United Nations is essentially analyzing everything that's going down, right? They're kind of having these sort of cordial discussions and so on and so forth. And then they're just kind of like, okay, let's get down to business. Let's get down to brass taxes, and see what's what. And so what they start doing is going over all the facts, right? America is totally conquered. The United States is lost. The government doesn't really exist. What's left of it is kind of split all over the place. The president, nobody really seems to be running the show outside of like a few generals who may be answering to some higher authority out there. But basically, any real possibility of a unified offensive front from the United States is a pipe dream. It's gone. It's out of the picture, right? That's not a possibility. And so with that, then it turns into how many more other places are they going to start attacking, right? There's attacks coming in from Israel and other countries. Like, who's next? What are we going to do here? And so that's when they start asking kind of the hard-hitting questions, like how soon will they be at these various cities? What steps are we going to take? And so that's when the United Nations, this kind of group here, basically sits down and says, then we're going to do the only thing that we can do. This is utilitarianism. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. New York, we can assume that there's maybe a 50% survival rate among the people who were there, which means there's still a few million people occupying that city. And the United States, you got maybe 290, probably around the time the story was written, assuming that there's not too different. So we can say like 275 million people in the United States. There's billions of people in the world. Gentlemen, we're going to do the only thing that we can do here. We are going to nuke the entire city of New York. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
incoherence.